May 31, 2007. Kate Beagley disappears without a trace. A devastated family. A man with dark secrets. Mysteries, lies, and suspicions start to unfold. What happened that night? The search for answers reveals a brutal crime, and a dangerous lie unravels before the law. Get ready to uncover the details of a case that shook an entire community. What would you do if the truth was more terrifying than you could ever imagine? Kate Beagley was an independent, hard-working woman and very responsible. At 32, she had a stable life, a good job, and a well-structured routine. She was known for being punctual, and that was something everyone around her could count on. So when she didn't show up for work on the morning of May 31, 2007, her colleagues and family immediately sensed something was off. It was completely unlike Kate to miss an appointment without letting anyone know in advance. Her father, Alan Beagley, went to her house to check if everything was okay. When he got there, he found the door locked and no sign of his daughter. Worried, he called her friends and acquaintances, but no one knew where Kate was. He then contacted the police to report her missing. Since she had never disappeared before, the family knew something was wrong. Kate had also planned to meet a friend that night, and she didn't show up. This detail only heightened their concerns, as she was the type of person who always kept her promises. Her disappearance began to gain attention among those who knew her and her co-workers, who started sharing information in hopes of finding her. Everyone was eager for any clues about her whereabouts. At the time, social media was still growing, but a group was created on Facebook to gather information. Friends and family started putting up posters around London, especially in places Kate frequently visited. The hope was that someone might have seen something suspicious or knew some information that could help the investigation. The police started searching right away, knowing that the first moments of a disappearance are crucial. They tried to track Kate's phone, but realized it was turned off. Also, her bank cards hadn't been used since the last time she was seen. This raised the suspicion that something serious had happened. Investigators then began retracing Kate's steps the night before. They quickly discovered that she had gone out for a date. This gave the investigation a new direction, as they now had a starting point. The man she met could have been the last person to see her before she disappeared. It was crucial to find him and understand what happened. Kate's family held on to the hope that she was alive and had just gone missing for some unknown reason. However, as the hours passed with no news, the fear that something serious had occurred grew stronger. For those who knew her, it was hard to believe that she would just vanish without any reason. With the first clues starting to emerge, the police ramped up their investigation. They needed to act fast to figure out what really happened that night. A man's name surfaced in their inquiries, and he would soon become the prime suspect. This was just the beginning of a case that would become one of the most shocking of the time. The police began investigating Kate Beagley's last movements the night before she disappeared. After reviewing her schedule and speaking with friends and family, they found out she had gone out for a date with a man named Carl Taylor. They had met a few weeks earlier at a nightclub in London, and Kate decided to give him a chance to get to know him better. This detail put Carl at the center of the investigation, since he could have been the last person to see her. Investigators tried to contact Carl for more information about the date. When they finally spoke with him, his version of events seemed straightforward. He said that Kate had dropped him off in Twickenham, a neighborhood in southwest London, and that he had not heard from her since. However, this story quickly began to fall apart as new evidence emerged. Carl's mother was one of the first people to raise suspicions against him. She told the police that later that night, her son showed up at their house driving a Volkswagen Golf, Kate's car. This was a big problem because Carl had never mentioned he had taken her car. To make matters worse, Witnesses claimed to have seen Carl cleaning the car suspiciously in the early hours of the morning after Kate's disappearance, as if he was trying to wipe away traces of something. Additionally, Carl's friends reported strange behavior on his part in the hours after Kate went missing. He was seen handing out shopping vouchers that belonged to her, as if trying to quickly get rid of anything that might tie him to the case. This raised a major red flag for investigators, as it seemed Carl was trying to hide something. Another detail that caught the police's attention was text messages sent from Kate's phone. Investigators gained access to the last texts she sent, and something didn't seem right. The tone and writing style were different from what they expected. Family and friends who knew Kate's texting style said the messages didn't feel natural. This suggested that someone else might have been using her phone to create the false impression that everything was fine. Given these inconsistencies, the police decided to press Carl Taylor for more details about his date with Kate. However, he started avoiding the police calls and didn't return their messages. Whenever an official number called, he ignored it. But when it was a personal number, he would pick up. This behavior only increased suspicions about his involvement in the disappearance. By this point, investigators had strong reasons to believe that Carl wasn't telling the truth. The contradictions in his story, the fact that he had Kate's car, the attempt to cover his tracks, and the suspicious messages created a troubling scenario. He was no longer just a witness. He was now the prime suspect in the case. With all this evidence, the police decided to act fast. If Carl was involved in Kate's disappearance, every minute counted. The decision was clear. It was time to locate him and bring him in for formal questioning. What they would discover next would confirm the worst fears of Kate's family. After the evidence continued piling up against Carl Taylor, the police tried contacting him again. However, he began ignoring calls from official numbers, which raised more suspicions about his behavior. The only calls he seemed willing to answer were from personal numbers, which made them even more suspicious. He was clearly trying to dodge the investigation and avoid any contact with the authorities. Given his evasive behavior and the mounting evidence, the police decided to take a more direct approach. They learned Carl would be at a party in London and decided to show up at the location to confront him. When they found him, his behavior was alarming. He seemed indifferent to Kate's disappearance, as if nothing had happened. This shocked the officers, as anyone in a similar situation would at least show some level of concern. This lack of empathy and concern for Kate's case only deepened suspicions that he was involved in the disappearance and possibly in something even more serious. He was so detached from the gravity of the situation that it seemed like he didn't understand the seriousness of the accusations against him. This was enough for the police to make a drastic decision: arrest him on suspicion of kidnapping. Carl was taken into custody and immediately brought in for interrogation. During the questioning, he remained silent, refusing to cooperate with the investigation. Whenever asked about what happened that night, his only response was no comment. This enigmatic behavior only added to the tension in the case, as he refused to explain what really happened to Kate. For the investigators, Carl's refusal to cooperate was a clear sign that he was trying to hide something important. His actions and demeanor were making it harder and harder to believe he was innocent. The police believed he knew exactly what had happened to Kate, but was trying to protect himself, perhaps out of fear of the consequences of his actions. Carl's lack of any remorse or concern only fueled the mystery further. He didn't seem to understand the severity of the situation, and this raised concerns that he might try to flee or commit another crime to avoid being arrested. As a result, the police started to fear that Carl could be a danger to society, and the investigation intensified to prevent any suspicious moves on his part. Even with the evidence against him and his seemingly cold demeanor, the police needed a confession to solve the case. They continued to press him during the interrogation, but Carl stayed silent, repeating the same answer to all questions. His refusal to cooperate and his arrogant attitude made it clear that he wasn't willing to help the police in any way. The investigation had reached a critical point. The authorities now needed to act fast to uncover the truth, as Carl's lack of cooperation could prolong Kate's family's suffering. The case would take a decisive turn in the next few hours, and the police had few options left but to force Carl to finally reveal what happened to Kate. Even though Carl refused to cooperate during the interrogation, the police already had solid evidence pointing to him as the person responsible for Kate's disappearance. One of the most revealing discoveries came from security cameras at a gas station. The footage showed Carl filling Kate's car with only a small amount of gas. This indicated he didn't plan to keep it for long, suggesting that he had already planned to get rid of the car right after the crime. This clue was crucial for the investigators because it showed that Carl was trying to cover his tracks and act quickly after what had happened to Kate. Even without his cooperation, the material evidence started tying up the details of the case, showing that Carl was involved in the disappearance and in something much more serious than simple omissions. The police felt that at any moment, Carl might finally crack under pressure and confess. After days of silence and relentless pressure from the investigators, Carl finally broke his silence. He confessed to the crime in a cold and direct manner. According to him, his initial goal had been to steal Kate's car, but things got out of control. When Kate resisted his robbery attempt, he stabbed her multiple times in the neck and head. Carl described the attack with an unsettling calmness, as if he were talking about something trivial. After committing the crime, Carl showed no remorse. He placed Kate's body in the trunk of the car and drove to a secluded area in Watford, where he abandoned her body in a desolate spot. This final act of inhumanity showed that not only did he want to steal Kate's car, but he also wanted to eliminate any trace of her presence. Kate's body was left in a place where it would be hard to find without a thorough investigation. The police followed the directions Carl gave them and managed to locate Kate's body in the area he described. When her body was found, the scene was even more macabre than the investigators had imagined. Kate had suffered over 30 stab wounds. The violence of the crime became even clearer with the discovery of how brutally she had been attacked. These horrifying details confirmed the gravity of the act committed by Carl. The discovery of her body was a relief for Kate's family, who could finally begin processing the loss of their daughter, even though the pain was immeasurable. For the investigators, it was also a crucial moment, as they now had all the necessary evidence to move forward with the case and ensure Carl faced the consequences of his actions. With Carl's confession and the location of Kate's body, the case finally started to take shape. However, the question that still lingered in everyone's mind was, what could have led Carl to commit such a brutal crime against someone he barely knew? This would be something he would carry with him forever, while the search for justice for Kate Beagley was just beginning. When Carl Taylor's trial finally began, he tried to change his version of events. During the trial, he claimed that Kate had taken her own life and that he had only tried to stop her. This attempt to alter the narrative to turn himself into a savior of the situation was quickly debunked by the prosecution. The prosecutors showed that it was impossible for someone to stab themselves that many times without losing consciousness, which made the suicide claim completely baseless. Additionally, the prosecution revealed darker details that helped dismantle Carl's defense. During the investigation, it was discovered that Carl had planned the attack in advance. He had hidden a knife in his sleeve on the day of the date with Kate, indicating that the crime wasn't impulsive, but a calculated act. These details enraged Kate's family, who listened in silence, hoping justice would be served. The trial also revealed Carl's manipulative nature. During the time he was incarcerated, He tried to get close to notorious criminals, such as Levi Belfield, the murderer of Millie Dowler. Carl seemed to be trying to build connections within the prison system, perhaps in hopes of gaining some sort of support or guidance to manipulate the judicial process. This attempt to associate with notorious criminals showed his cold and calculating personality and his total lack of remorse for what he had done. Meanwhile, the jury listened closely to all the evidence and testimonies. With each revelation, the weight of the charges against Carl became more apparent. The coldness with which he planned and executed the crime, his lack of remorse during the trial, and his attempt to manipulate the justice system were factors that weighed heavily against him. When the case was handed to the jury, expectations were high. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before reaching a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The speed with which they made their decision reflected the clarity of the evidence against Carl, which was irrefutable. With the conviction, Carl was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 30 years before he could apply for parole. The sentence brought, for Kate's family, a sense that at least the man responsible for the brutal death of their daughter would pay for his actions. However, the emptiness left by Kate's loss could never be filled. During the trial, the pain of the Beagley family was always visible. They waited anxiously for the moment when Carl would finally be held accountable for his cruelty. And although the sentence was a partial victory, Kate's memory and the fight for justice for her would never be forgotten. Kate Beagley's brutal death left her family and friends devastated. Her father, Alan Beagley, was one of the most emotional figures throughout the whole process. In an interview, he said that life would never be the same and that the pain of losing his daughter was something he never imagined he would have to bear. The emotional impact of losing a daughter in such a tragic and violent way can't be described in words, and Alan couldn't hide the sadness that had taken over his life since the moment she disappeared. In addition to the family's pain, the community was also deeply affected by the crime. Kate wasn't just a beloved daughter and friend, but also someone who radiated kindness and generosity. The news of her brutal death shocked everyone, especially because no one could imagine something so cruel happening to such an ordinary and kind person. As a tribute to Kate, flowers were left at the spot where her body was found in Watford, turning the area into an informal memorial. Amidst this tragedy, one of the messages left by an anonymous person at the memorial deeply touched the hearts of Kate's family and friends. The message read, "I never met you, but I feel like I've known you my whole life." This simple phrase reflected the empathy and love the community felt for Kate, even without knowing her personally. It was a reminder of how her life had touched so many people, even if just briefly. Despite the sorrow and sadness, the police were praised for the way they handled the investigation. The investigative team was commended not only for their competence, but also for their dedication in ensuring that Carl Taylor would be held accountable for his actions. Carl's conviction was seen as a victory for justice, showing that while evil had been done, the truth would be revealed, and the criminal would be punished. However, despite justice being served, the void left by Kate's death could never be filled. No sentence or punishment would bring Kate back to her family and friends. The pain and suffering would continue to haunt the Beagleys, who would spend the rest of their lives with the memory of their daughter and the weight of the loss they carried. Kate's story also served as a reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictable violence that can hide in the most unexpected places. While justice was served in Kate's case, the pain of the loss and the trauma caused by this brutal crime would never fully disappear for those who loved her. And so, the impact of the crime transcended Kate's life, leaving a lasting mark on the community and the people who, in some way, were touched by her tragedy. Kate's memory would live on in every flower left behind, in every message at the memorial, and, most of all, in the hearts of all who missed her.